Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. Ezra Taft Benson was a strong critic of both civil rights for blacks as well as communism. In fact, he linked them together and called the civil rights movement a communist conspiracy. Why was that? Dr. Matt Harris will answer that question. We'll learn more about why he was opposed to both groups. Check out our conversation. I'd also like to remind you, if you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please go to our Patreon site. Go to patreon.com/gospeltangents, and for just $5 a month, you can hear the entire interview uncut. Now back to our conversation.
So the other thing is, part of the story is, if we can go back just for a quick moment, that after the whole Harding speech on the floor of the Congress, it created a buzzstorm. And the brethren, President McKay, we got to get Benson out of the country. We've got to purify his blood. That's what Joseph Fielding Smith says in a private letter. We've got to get him out of the country and purify his blood. What he meant by that is purify his blood of politics. Birch. And so in 1963, ironically enough, the same month that Hugh B. Brown is giving that civil rights statement in conference, Elder Benson's going to get summoned to the First Presidency's offices to be told that he's going to be sent to Germany to preside over the European mission. And Elder Benson thinks that Martin Luther King, this is a Birch view, of course, but Elder Benson is following the Birch line, thinking that Dr. King is a communist agent. That somehow if you push for racial equality, you also want economic equality, and that makes you a socialist and a communist. And so Elder Benson's furious with Hugh B. Brown's General Conference talk, where the church is on record as supporting civil rights. Now keep in mind what that means. Brown never said that we favor the civil rights stuff going on in Congress right now, nor do we favor particular legislation in the state of Utah. There was nothing specific about it. And he would write that, too, to other Latter-day Saints who wrote him letters. Does that mean we support the Civil Rights Act of 1963 that John F. Kennedy is pushing through? He'd write back, we don't support any particular policy. I just want you to know that we do support civil rights as a general principle. So clearly there's some hedging going on. But anyway, Ezra Taft Benson is upset, really upset, about this civil rights speech that Brown gives. And they've long been at odds already over the Birch stuff. Brown in 1962, in the priesthood session of General Conference, gives this rip-roaring sermon in which he says that our meeting houses are not to be used for partisan political purposes. He never mentions the Birch Society, but everybody knows what he's talking about. After that speech, Benson and Reed Benson, the two Bensons, father-son, they go into President McKay's office, and they said, "We heard President Brown's speech. Was he referring to us in the Birch Society?" McKay said, "Yeah, and Cleon Skousen too." And so it was very clear, it was unambiguous what President Brown meant, because President McKay told him. But anyway, so there was some tension between President Brown and Elder Benson. And in the fall of '63, as Elder Benson's preparing to start his European mission, it's supposed to start January 1 of '64. As he's preparing to head overseas, he gives 3 very aggressive and vociferous anti-civil rights sermons, not surprisingly just weeks after President Brown's civil rights address and conference. So Elder Benson is speaking to Latter-day Saint groups in Utah, in Idaho, and where was the other one? I think it was Arizona. 3 groups in which he just blasts Dr. King. Actually, no, I'm mistaken. Boise was one, Logan was one, and BYU, those 3 places. So he blasts Dr. King at these 3 instances, and he almost lifts verbatim, word for word, from Birch literature, including The Politician, in his speeches. It's really amazing. At the Logan address, in the Logan Tabernacle, no less, there are 3 economics professors, LDS economics professors there, teach at Utah State. And they heard the address, and they thought, my goodness, this sounds just like Birch literature. So they went back to the Blue Book. It was a Birch guide or manual. They went to the Blue Book and they found passages almost verbatim, and they Xeroxed the passages with the speech, Elder Benson's speech, and sent them to President McKay. And they circled everything for him to see, And So anyway, it was called to their attention that this stuff's going on, and then they said very clearly, we're going to get him out of the country where he can focus on the ministry. So they called him to preside over the European mission. And it wasn't uncommon, by the way, to have apostles preside over missions. I mean, you're not going to see that a whole lot today. I know Elder Holland had served somewhere overseas for a short while. I think another apostle had a short stint somewhere. Typically, the apostles, their energies and their talents are needed elsewhere, not over just a particular geographic locale. But in those days, there was somewhat of a precedent to call an apostle to serve over a mission. Enel and Tanner had served over the West European mission just a few years earlier, and he was an apostle. So anyway, President Elder Benson is now presiding over the European mission, and he's still involved in politics as much as ever. In fact, I have all of his Birch correspondence that will be published in my book. And what's interesting is a lot of the correspondence that you have is, it says West European Mission letterhead. And this is the letterhead that he uses when he corresponds with Robert Welch. And Welch is keeping abreast on all the civil rights stuff that's going on, with Martin Luther King, with the Civil Rights Bill, the Voting Rights Act, all of this stuff. That's really the subject of most of their correspondence. And Elder Benson comes back in the spring of 1965 to General Conference. And he gives this rip-roaring General Conference address in which he absolutely condemns the civil rights movement. It's creating communism. It's going to bloat the federal government to have the FBI and the federal bureaucracy oversee civil rights. This is not what we want. I warned you before I left for Europe this would happen. I mean, it's pretty aggressive stuff.
Wow.
And it's about 2 or 3 paragraphs of the speech that the brethren will take out. Hugh B. Brown goes to the First Presidency and says, President McKay, what do you think? And they agree to strike it from the record. And by that point, now just pause for a moment. So in the fall of 1963, this is Brown's civil rights statement. In the spring of 65, you've got an apostle, albeit a junior apostle, but he's given this anti-civil rights statement. Latter-day Saints are confused. Reporters are confused. Whose is the official church position? And there's a reporter from the New York Times and Washington Post. I think, and the other one was the San Francisco Chronicler, I think. There were 3 different news agencies that approached Hugh B. Brown after Elder Benson's anti-civil rights conference address in the spring of 65. And they asked him very bluntly, whose position is the correct one? Mine. It's been approved by the church president. And he storms away. And so so he goes back to Europe, Elder Benson, and wow, the story is thick. Goes back to Europe, and this is in the spring of 65. By September of 65, his mission ends. He comes home after about 1.5 years. And I'm not sure if that was supposed to be the duration of it. I'm not sure. Maybe they thought he was purified by then. I can't imagine why they would think that. But he comes home in January of 65 to an absolute dust storm. His son, who still works for the Birch Society, he's been on the payroll for 4 years now, his son sends out this incendiary memo on Birch letterhead to the Utah chapter of the Birch Society. And he says that, I'll paraphrase, but we can't be too happy with Brown's General Conference address 2 years earlier with civil rights, because it's communist inspired. And we can't be happy about it. We have to push back on that. Let's start a rumor that some black power advocates will come to Salt Lake. This is September of 65. This memo. Let's start a rumor that the black power advocates are going to come to Salt Lake and perhaps even commit acts of violence against the church during conference. This is the memo that he sends out to the Birchers. Yeah, Reed Benson.
Wow.
And his father comes home to that bedlam. It creates such a storm that the Deseret News, the Salt Lake Tribune, they get word of the rumor. They have no idea who starts it. But that's the rumor that black power advocates from California in particular are going to come to Salt Lake City and perhaps even commit acts of violence against the church. And so the governor of Utah puts the National Guard on high alert. They do all kinds of training exercises. They decide that they're going to put marksmen on the roof of the temple in case these keep in mind what's going on too in the larger American society, that African Americans are protesting and rioting in major cities over poverty and police brutality and a number of things. And so the church leaders feel threatened by this. And so you can see that Reed Benson touches a raw nerve when he says they're coming for us because they don't like our racial policies. So they have all of this intense fervor going in the National Guard. They're doing all this intense training. They're having snipers. We're going to put a sniper here, sniper here. I mean, that's how intense it is. And the NAACP, meanwhile, the local chapter, they're just beside themselves. This is garbage. Nothing of the sort's going to happen. They have no idea who plants the rumor. But so they emphatically push back that this is what's going on. And anyway, Elder Benson comes home in the midst of all of that. And whether Elder Benson knows what his son is doing, I have no evidence for that. Hard to imagine he didn't know, simply because they were close confidants. But there's no evidence to suggest that his father knew about it, much less approved it. But anyway, in November of that year, Elder Benson gives a general conference address, but he's on the low now, since that previous one, the previous spring, where he talked about the civil rights, and they cut a third of it out. And
cut a third of it out of what?
Of the published version of the general.
The published version.
Yeah.
So they didn't publish the whole thing.
No, you have to read my book to see the real thing.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, it's like 3 or 4 paragraphs is what it is. It's not huge, but the most incendiary rhetoric they cut out, it's like 3 or 4 paragraphs. So in November of 1965, or in October of 65, he gives a general conference address, and it's mild. He recognizes he came home to a firestorm, so he keeps it calm. But a year afterwards, in November of 65, he tells the brethren in a private meeting with the 12, he says, Martin King's a commie. Dr. he actually calls him Martin King. Martin King's a commie, and we can't support him. Don't fall for this. That civil rights is a good thing.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Matt Harris. In our next conversation, we'll talk about Ezra Taft Benson's attempts to run for the United States presidency.
So he goes back to Salt Lake and tells tells President McKay, highly confidential meeting. They want me to be the presidential candidate with Wallace. And this is on the independent ticket, because there's a Republican Mormon who might wrap up the Republican nomination. So we've got 2 high-profile Mormons running for the same candidate.
And this is George Romney.
It's George Romney, right. And what really muddies the water is there's a number of brethren who support George Romney and not Benson.
We'll have a transcript out shortly on this conversation, and you can purchase individual copies at our website at gospeltangents.com/shop. If you want to be the first to get a copy, please subscribe on our website for just $10 a month. I'll send it to you first as a PDF. Or if you'd like a physical copy, for $15 a month, I'll be happy to send that to you as well. You can get our transcripts at our Amazon.com author page. I've got a link here, but just do a search for Gospel Tangents interview and you should be able to find a bunch of them there. Please subscribe at patreon.com/gospeltangents. For $5 a month, you can hear the entire interview uncut. And for $10, you can get a PDF copy. We've also got a $15 tier where if you want a physical copy, I'll be the first to send it to you. So please subscribe at Patreon or on our website at gospeltangents.com as well. For our latest updates, please like our page at facebook.com/gospeltangents. And also check our Twitter updates at Gospel Tangents as well. Please subscribe on our Apple Podcasts page at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents, or you can subscribe on your Android device. Just do a search for Gospel Tangents. Thanks again for listening. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here we've got some more of our great videos. Thanks again.